And as Netanyahu doubles down on his calls for total victory in the Gaza Strip, there have been reports of growing rifts both within the Israeli government and Israeli society. We're going to talk about that with our Doug Herbert, who joins me on set. Doug, what more can you tell us?
Well, these rifts are more than just speculation. They're growing more and more apparent, even in the words of war cabinet members and one retired, top military official on Israeli television in the past few days. Gadi Eisenkot is his name. He lost a son in the war in Gaza. He's very credible and he's very respected in Israeli society. He basically said that there's, a contradiction. His words really reflect, in a sense, what we're hearing from other top generals and war cabinet members. There's a contradiction between Netanyahu's repeated pledges, as you said, to fight, to wage this military offensive in Gaza until, quote, total victory, and his promise to the families and relatives of the hostages being held, the Israeli hostages, to secure their release. That these are competing prerogatives here. You cannot totally say you are going to keep going after eradicating Hamas without putting at some point those hostages' lives in danger and jeopardizing their release. Hamas itself has said, at least publicly, officially, that there is, quote, no chance of the return of hostages until Israel agrees to wind down, to end its war, to withdraw its forces. So both sides really digging in their heels, doubling down in their official statements. Netanyahu obviously caught in a very tough bind because some would argue he made his bed, he sleeps in it. He made his bed in the sense that he, is doing business with the most far-right coalition in history, a far-right coalition that wants absolutely no business negotiating, speaking to Hamas in any way. They're going for broke in this. So Netanyahu is, in a sense, doing the far-right coalition's bidding at this point, even though for them he's not even going far enough. Unofficially, you do have reports, and one notably over the weekend in the Wall Street Journal in the United States, that both the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt are stepping up or mounting the pressure on both parties, both Israel and Hamas, to do exactly what each side says they're not about to do, which is to engage in serious negotiations. Negotiations which presumably would lead to, in some way, shape, or form, the release in a first phase of some civilian hostages, not all of them, but the civilian hostages, followed by, in a final stage, according to this sort of preliminary plan, the withdrawal of Israeli defense forces from Gaza and a formal declaration of the end of the war. Obviously, that is not happening tomorrow, not on the horizon, and this is right now just reports of pressure and prospective talks. But what we are seeing is that this contradiction, the rifts that I was speaking of in this Israeli government and Israeli society, the Israelis backing the military offensive, but also at the same time wanting those hostages released, it's leading to a situation where the question must be asked, can Netanyahu hold this absolutist until total victory position for very long? Something has to give at some point.
And from an international standpoint, Doug, there's still a lot of diplomacy underway. Obviously, the EU and the U.S. are really working at trying to find ways to bring peace to the region in any way they can.
Yeah, right now what you have today is European Union's foreign ministers are going to be meeting with several officials from Arab countries, from Israeli and Palestinian officials as well, their foreign ministers. And what are they looking at? Well, the same types of things that I was just speaking about with respect to the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt. They're going to be looking at a way to wind down this war, to wind down the military offensive, to secure the release of those hostages, and they're also looking at the roadmap in the endgame, the creation of a Palestinian state. Remember, formally, as of this hour, Benjamin Netanyahu has repeatedly said he rejects Joe Biden's vision of a two-state Palestinian solution. At the same time, Joe Biden is trying to sort of tamp down their differences, even though he said privately to be infuriated with Netanyahu. He's trying to hold out the prospect that there are many different ways you could reach a Palestinian state, and perhaps Netanyahu would be open to some of them. Biden trying to suggest he's not ruling them all out. There's definitely a rift there, but this European plan would envision the creation of some sort of a vision for a Palestinian statehood, but perhaps more importantly, within the framework of that, a peace process, laying the groundwork for what would be called a comprehensive regional plan and a regional peace process that would draw in the Arab regions of the area, the UN, the US, Israel, so on and so forth. We're far from it. It's not happening yet. But at least we have right now the diplomats on all sides of this conflict ramping up their efforts to try to hammer out some sort of vision for a compromise that could see this war, this horrific war, wind down at some point, despite the very militaristic, even belligerent, you might say, rhetoric coming from both sides.